everyone. We're excited to introduce NRx Pharmaceuticals and its subsidiary, Hope Therapeutics. NRx trades on the NASDAQ under the symbol NRXP and is the first company dedicated to treatments and delivery of care for suicidal depression and PTSD. Presenting today will be Dr. Jonathan Javitt, founder and chairman. And in addition to his role at NRx, Jonathan is professor of the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine and an officer in the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary. He has previously led 5 healthcare startup companies with public exits and has served as an advisor in healthcare and national security to 4 U.S. presidential administrations and a special assistant to the U.S. Undersecretary of Defense. It's wonderful to have you on the conference today, Doctor. Welcome.
Thank you, Anna.
All right, the floor is yours. Call me when you're ready for questions.
Oh, you're wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining me today. And we are a publicly traded company. I am going to be making forward-looking statements. I can't tell you that these forward-looking statements are going to come true. All I can tell you is that we work our hardest every day to make them come true. And what I'd like to focus on today is NRx's most active clinical programs and why we believe we have a path to profitability in 2025. So we're developing 2 drugs, NRx 100, which is intravenous ketamine, NRx 101, which is an oral medicine fixed dose combination of D-cycloserine and lurasidone. The ketamine product, NRx 100, is awarded fast track by the FDA. We're filing a new drug application this year, that is 2024. We expect a PDUFA date in 2025. And we believe we have approvable efficacy data from 4 studies in hand, manufacturing data that's reached 12-month stability, ketamine toxicity data demonstrating safety over at least 6 months, alignment with the FDA on our pediatric plan, and a $2 billion addressable market for that near-term drug. On NRx 101, we believe we have statistically significant phase 2 data demonstrating that this is the first oral antidepressant to decrease suicidality and akathisia. We plan to file a new drug application for accelerated approval in the narrow indication of bipolar patients with akathisia. So that's not the 3 million people who have bipolar depression, but rather the 500 to 600,000 people who have akathisia and suicidality despite best available antidepressants. Ultimately, we believe this drug also has a $2 billion addressable market. And today we're also going to be talking about Hope Therapeutics, a network of interventional psychiatry clinics focused on ketamine and other life-saving interventions for suicidal depression that we're in the process of standing up. And we've said that we're targeting $100 million of revenue in Hope Therapeutics by the end of 2025. We have commitments for acquisition financing on a non-dilutive basis. We expect our first acquisitions in 2024. We've already announced some of the letters of intent, and we expect profit that will devolve to our shareholders, to you, in 2025. You've seen recently published independent research from E.F. Hutton and others. As you can see, they've put a $31 price target on our stock. And interestingly, we're seeing more and more pickup on the international side of this coverage. So as you know, suicide is a global crisis. Suicidality kills more than 50,000 Americans every year and 500,000 around the globe. It disproportionately affects young people, people with bipolar disorder. 3.8 million people, according to the CDC, made a plan to kill themselves last year. This is a condition that takes our best and our brightest. It's a condition that's more lethal than just about any cancer known to man. And yet, today there are no drugs that effectively treat suicidality. When you look at bipolar depression, the form of depression that's most likely to be associated with suicidality, if you know two people with bipolar depression, one will attempt suicide over the course of a lifetime. If you know 5 people with bipolar depression, one will tragically succeed. So let's talk about NRx 100 ketamine, because today there's no FDA-approved medication identified as able to treat acute suicidality. The only FDA-approved therapy is electroconvulsive therapy. Now, IV ketamine is used off-label. It's not FDA-approved and therefore not reimbursable by insurance. Intranasal ketamine, the Spravato nasal spray, is approved, but the majority of practices continue to use IV ketamine, and at least on an anecdotal basis, they prefer it. Spravato is approved for treatment of depression, but not yet for treatment of suicidality. It's important to recognize, though, that ketamine's not enough. We need a whole new system of care that includes ketamine, because for maximum effectiveness, it has to be supplemented by transcranial magnetic stimulation, by digital therapeutics, and by appropriate psychiatric care. What's transcranial magnetic stimulation? It's an FDA-approved treatment that uses magnets outside the skull, outside the patient's head, to achieve benefits within the brain. I'll talk more about digital therapeutics as we go on. This is technology that I first became involved with in conjunction with DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and trials funded by the U.S. Department of Defense. We're now in the process of adapting that technology for civilian use. And we're doing all of this under the banner of Hope Therapeutics, which is a network of interventional psychiatry clinics focused on ketamine and other life-saving interventions for suicidal depression and PTSD. Unlike many of the clinics that provide ketamine today, Hope Therapeutics clinics are psychiatrist-led. They're focused both on the efficacy of ketamine, but on the safety of the patient, on common protocols, on measured outcomes, but most importantly, on integrating care with ketamine, TMS, digital therapeutics, and of course, psychiatric medication management, all in a coherent package. And if we do this right, we have the potential to reach 70 million lives. So let's get into the details of NRx 100 or ketamine, because it aims to be the first FDA-approved ketamine product to treat suicidal depression. Now, ketamine is being widely used, although it's not reimbursed by insurance, and therefore it's generally available only to patients who can pay for it out of pocket. Why is it not approved for depression? Well, the most important reason is that no company prior to us has applied to the FDA for the approval of IV ketamine to treat depression. And if you don't apply, you don't have any chance of getting an approval. No other company has announced completion of manufacture. That's the module 3 that has to be part of a new drug application of an IV ketamine formulation that's targeted for the treatment of suicidal depression. No other companies announced patient-level efficacy data demonstrating the effectiveness of IV ketamine in the treatment of suicidal depression. No other companies announced completion of the FDA-required neurotoxicity studies to support an application for ketamine in the treatment of suicidal depression. And no other companies announced 12-month real-time stability data associated with a formulation of ketamine to treat suicidal depression. We've achieved those milestones, and we expect to file a new drug application under our FDA Fast Track designation this year. So it's very easy for people to blame the FDA and say they haven't approved ketamine for this indication, but they can't do it unless somebody applies, and we're doing just that. Here's a very brief summary of the efficacy data that we have in hand to support a filing. There's a French government-funded study with which we've contracted. 156 patients at 7 hospitals admitted with acute suicidality, randomized to ketamine versus placebo. 84% remission on ketamine versus 28% on placebo in the bipolar depression group, and a p-value of 0.0001 on their primary endpoint. We've also licensed from Columbia University an NIH-funded clinical trial that randomized patients between ketamine and midazolam, which is an active placebo. And if you saw the rejection of the MDMA clinical trials, it was because the FDA, or it was partly because the FDA insisted that not only do you compare to a passive placebo, but you compare to an active drug that might reduce the likelihood of inadvertent unblinding. And again, in this trial, they demonstrated the same efficacy that was seen in the French study. And then they took the people who were randomized initially to midazolam, to the active comparator, put them on ketamine, that's the green line, and demonstrated that they got the same result from ketamine as the people who were randomized to ketamine in the first place. And most recently, PCORI funded a 400-person clinical trial showing that ketamine is not inferior to electroconvulsive therapy. But if you actually look at the data, ketamine was actually superior to electroconvulsive therapy. So we believe there's efficacy data in hand that supports a drug approval, and we've reviewed that with our regulatory counsel and gotten their agreement as well. It's important to talk about why ketamine works, because there's been a lot of chatter about psychedelic drugs and the importance of psychedelics and hallucinations. We believe that hallucinations are actually a side effect of these drugs. The NMDA antagonist drugs work and create long-term changes for patients because they increase ideation. When you block the NMDA receptor, you have more ideas per minute. If you block it too hard, you have too many ideas per minute, you start to hallucinate. But more importantly, you upregulate brain glutamate, which can be shown on MRI, and we've published that. You upregulate neuroplasticity, which is the rate at which brain cells reach out and start creating new connections to other brain cells. You cause new synapses to form in the brain. And on our website, you can find papers in leading journals, including Science and Scientific American, demonstrating that. So we believe that hallucination is a side effect, not the main effect of why these NMDA drugs produce such a powerful benefit. We've formed many partnerships in the process with Harvard Mass General, with Columbia, with University of Nimes in France, with the Fondation Fondamentale that helped us gain access to the French data, with researchers at Baylor College of Medicine, University of Alabama at Birmingham. And these folks appear as co-authors in our papers with Yale University, with Rambam Healthcare Campus. And we continue to form partnerships with those who have been thought leaders in this field. There's broad support for use of ketamine within the psychiatric community, and you can read these editorials in JAMA Psychiatry. Now, ketamine is a neurotoxic drug, and it's important to prove that in the doses and duration we're using, it's safe. So we've done that. FDA specified the neurotoxicity protocol that we needed to use in animals. We've completed those studies, and FDA advised us that the non-clinical requirements were met. Now, you've heard us talk about preservative-free ketamine and why that's important. Well, the preservative in the ketamine just plain doesn't belong there. It was put in the bottle back in the 1970s when the original ketamine formulation was designed so that an anesthesiologist could draw out of the bottle multiple times and give it to multiple patients, which is a practice that's not even legal in hospitals today. And that preservative in ketamine, benzethonium chloride, is good for killing germs, but it certainly doesn't save patients. If you look at the manufacturer's data sheet, benzethonium chloride is a highly toxic substance. It's been shown in my home specialty in ophthalmology to be highly toxic to the surface of the eye, and it's no less toxic to brain cells. And that's the reason that we've formulated ketamine as a preservative-free, single patient use product. And that's why we believe that preservative-free ketamine will become standard of care as soon as it's available to patients. Intravenous drugs don't tend to have these toxic preservatives in them anymore, and we're certainly getting it out of our drug. Let's talk a bit about NRx 101. That's our oral medicine, our combination of D-cycloserine and lurasidone for treating bipolar depression with suicidality or akathisia. And we aim to be the first non-ketamine, non-addictive, non-psychedelic or hallucinogenic product to treat suicidal depression. Our clinical trials so far show that we're the first antidepressant to demonstrate reduced akathisia and suicidality in multiple clinical trials. Now, there is a 5-HT2A drug that was recently approved by FDA that showed it had less akathisia. That doesn't mean it reduced the akathisia that patients came in with. It simply means that it caused less akathisia than the standard of care drugs. So, what is akathisia? Why are people suddenly talking about it? Well, akathisia is this horrible, irresistible need to move, to do something, to be unable to sit still, pace around the room. And when you talk to psychiatrists, they'll tell you that akathisia is a life-threatening complication. Those are the people who jump in front of trains, jump off the roof, and kill themselves in sudden and violent ways. We have the first oral antidepressant shown to reduce both suicidality and akathisia. And the market for that is in excess of $2 billion. Now, we didn't yet demonstrate that our drug is more effective than placebo in reducing depression. It's equal to standard of care drugs in reducing depression, but we haven't yet demonstrated superiority over placebo. So we believe that that enables us to file for accelerated approval in the narrower population of patients, about 500,000 or 600,000 patients a year, who have suicidality or akathisia despite use of standard of care antidepressants. Now, all antidepressants today carry black box warnings for suicidality and akathisia. Since we began this company, we've lost a founding investor and the child of a board member to this condition, to suicidality that happens on commonly prescribed antidepressants. So we understand how critically urgent the need for this is, and we hope the FDA will understand that as well. Here's the data that we presented recently at the national meeting. Here's a phase 2b3 randomized double-blind trial of NRx 101 versus standard of care, which was lurasidone, in suicidal patients with treatment-resistant bipolar depression. We saw a similar reduction in depression to lurasidone, 50% reduction in both cases. But we saw a significant reduction in akathisia versus lurasidone with a p-value of 0.03 and a decreased time to sustained remission from suicidality on the Columbia Suicide Scale that is the standard of care. Our key opinion leaders have advised us that an antidepressant that has standard of care level efficacy on depression and a significant reduction in akathisia and suicidality can become the new standard in bipolar depression. They've reminded us that akathisia is the worst side effect of current treatment. And to the best of our knowledge, this is the first clinical trial of an oral antidepressant that deliberately enrolled rather than excluded suicidal patients. Now, this isn't the first time we've shown this. We did an earlier trial where we took patients who were acutely suicidal, gave them ketamine to stabilize them, and then demonstrated that NRx 101 was actually superior to lurasidone on depression and suicidality. So we've now demonstrated the same finding in 2 different clinical trials. It gives us a potential product profile to make the claim, if the FDA approves the claim, that NRx 101 reduces depression scores by about 50%, similar to the standard of care drug, and that it's the only drug to demonstrate clinically meaningful reduction in akathisia and suicidality versus standard of care. Now, this is a drug that's protected by a patent estate of more than 48 issued and 43 pending patents around the world, all based on the composition of matter and the unique combination of an anti-NMDA drug with a 5-HT2A drug. You can read the patents, you can read the examiner's responses, and hopefully you'll convince yourself, as we are convinced, that this is a drug that can enjoy market exclusivity at least to 2033 with the potential for patent extensions beyond that. This drug is commercial ready for manufacture. We have stability well in excess of a year on our manufactured lots, and we have more than 1 million phase 3 commercial process capsules in hand in our warehouse. So this is not a drug that would have to be transferred to a manufacturer to begin the manufacturing process. It's done, it's ready. So finally, let's talk about Hope Therapeutics. This is the first nationwide network of interventional psychiatry clinics focused on suicidal depression and PTSD. We've announced the first letters of intent to fold existing clinics into Hope Therapeutics, and you'll be seeing not only more letters of intent being announced, but the completion of those acquisitions. And we believe that our approach is trailblazing in that this is led by psychiatrists. It's a precision psychiatry network that will provide interventional pharmaceutical therapy, transcranial magnetic stimulation, digital therapeutics, and supportive therapy for suicidal depression, PTSD, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, and others. And our vision is that when people tell the story of their mental health journey, they and their family will end the story by saying, "We went to Hope and we were cured." Because developing life-saving drugs is important and necessary, but unless we fix the system of care, we're not going to achieve what we need to. Ketamine doesn't belong in med spas, and it doesn't belong at home. You're reading horror stories in the press. You're reading enforcement actions by the DEA. You've just seen a key national seminar conducted by the FDA focusing on the inappropriateness of the use of ketamine outside of a medical supervised environment. And we intend to build that environment. It's not just about ketamine, it's about psychiatric leadership, a focus on safety, common protocols, and measured outcomes. So I've talked, you all understand what ketamine is. You all understand what TMS is. It's an FDA-approved treatment. What's this about digital therapeutics? And this really stems from work that I was involved with in the early 2000s in conjunction with DARPA and the Navy Bureau of Medicine. It actually began in the world of transcendental meditation, where people demonstrated that synchronizing breathing and heart rate creates something called autonomic coherence and improves heart rate variability with resulting decreased markers in stress. Now, meditation is hard for people to do. Most people won't do it. So the challenge was to develop digital tools that enabled people to achieve those same benefits of autonomic coherence without having to learn to meditate. And DARPA funded that back in the early 2000s. We produced a tool that is available today for sale within the entire Department of Defense. That was initially designed to improve combat performance by decreasing combat-related stress. But when it was taken to first responders in the aftermath of 9/11, we actually saw a decrease in symptoms of depression compared to control. And that's what we intend to take into Hope Therapeutics. To create a patient total care umbrella based on state-of-the-art CRM tools. People sometimes think of that as Salesforce because that's the most commonly used CRM, but there are others as well that will coordinate a precision psychiatry and medication management approach built on the three pillars of ketamine and NMDA therapy, transcranial magnetic stimulation, and digital therapeutics. Well, why spin out a separate company? Well, the reason is NRx is a biotechnology company that's focused on research and development of drugs. Hope is a healthcare delivery company focused on interventional psychiatry and digital therapeutics. We expect that most of the patients who come to Hope will be able to achieve insurance reimbursement, and will transform what today is a cash and carry market that's really available only to those who can pay out of pocket to a national safety umbrella, a place where people think of going first if they suffer from suicidal depression or PTSD. Now, Hope is able to use ketamine today under 503B pharmacy licenses, and we anticipate that Hope will use NRx's ketamine tomorrow under an FDA approval where a 503B, a compounding pharmacy, is not needed in the supply chain. And the financing for Hope is independent of the equity that we've raised to fund NRx. It's being financed through the corporate bond, the commercial loan mechanism, and we've announced that we have letters of commitment in hand from lenders who are more than capable of funding our first $100 million of clinic acquisition. So our objective is to make good clinics great, to acquire ketamine clinics, bring them under a common umbrella. Many of them are doing some of these technologies, but not all of them. Not all of them use telepsychiatry. We intend to put a psychiatric front end on all of the clinics within the Hope Network and to build shareholder value through that mechanism. Thus, we've said that by the end of this year, we're aiming to have $25 million of clinic revenue within the Hope umbrella. And by the end of next year, we've projected a $100 million run rate with positive EBITDA that will benefit our shareholders. Right now, Hope Therapeutics is entirely owned by NRx, but we do expect not only other shareholders to come on board. We've told our NRx shareholders that part of Hope will be dividended out to those shareholders, and that's something that we continue to intend undoing. In order to do that, we needed to remove one of our lenders from our cap table, and you've seen those announcements. So you've also seen Hope Therapeutics move forward to the audits that are required for that shared distribution. So that remains an active part of our business plan. Our leadership team today consists of myself, Matthew Duffy, who's the co-CEO of Hope Therapeutics. Matt began his career at Pfizer, went from being a local sales rep to the first product manager of Viagra, went on to multiple other biotechnology companies, became a securities analyst on Wall Street, has recently been CEO of several successful companies in this space. Rick Panicucci, our Chief Technology Officer, has more than 25 years of pharmaceutical manufacturing leadership and process development. And our CFO, Rich Narito, began his career at PricewaterhouseCoopers. And as you've seen, since he's been on board, our financial statements have gone forward to you on time and without incident. Our advisory board includes Dr. Andy Nierenberg, who's head of bipolar research at Harvard Mass General, Professor Jerry Senecor at Yale, who's agreed to lead our REMS program, Phil Lavin, who has more approved drugs to his name than any methodologist in the history of drug development. I'm Professor Marion Leboyer, the founder of the Fondation Fondamentale, who's been instrumental in helping us access the French government ketamine data, and who's built the first foundation anywhere in the world that's directly focused on new technologies for treatment of suicidal depression. So thank you for listening to me. I look forward to your questions, look forward to continuing to engage with you on this extraordinary ride. Anna, you came on right at the right time.
Yes. I think we might have time for one quick question. We do have lots of questions for you, but we have to stay on time for our next presenter. Just a quick question for you. You were an ophthalmologist by training. How did you get involved in this venture?
You know, this began for me in 2009 when my best friend, someone who was first in his class at Yale College, someone who was first in his class at Harvard Medical School, someone who was chosen to lead the entire pain control research program for the National Institutes of Health, came to me, told me he was having an episode of bipolar depression, and asked me to be involved. And, I made sure that he was seeing good psychiatrists, one that he had chosen, was, on the medicine that they had prescribed, and yet 2 weeks later, he was dead from suicide.
Wow.
And that's when I realized how lethal this condition is and how little we've done to change that lethality over the last 50 years. So we intend to make that change.
Wonderful. Well, very important work you're doing, Doctor. Please come back on our conference in the future with some updates. We appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, stay with us. We'll be right back with our next presenter.